So many people, when they start to learn language, like say English, they say perhaps maybe it's better not to focus on the grammar. Maybe it's better to just like try to memorize some words. Maybe get used to how people talk because that's how children learn, right? But the thing is, Turkish is a bit different in that sense. It is an extremely structured language, which both makes it different to learn, but it also makes it a lot easier. And that's what I want to help you guys through today. And the way I like to teach it is to first go over those four main rules that I've set up. So I understand that they may not be exactly the same as what other people may think, but this is how I see Turkish, and this is how I think is the most useful way to see it as a foreign learner. So Turkish basically has four main rules. We have rule number one, which is that there are no genders in Turkish. That is, there's no he, no she, no it even, nothing. You just have o. So you don't have to worry about things like nowadays, like with all the different genders and things like they and z and so forth. It's just o. O for everyone. Next, we have that in the Turkish language, the structure is subject, object, verb. Now, this may come across as something unimportant, irrelevant, but in fact, it is actually incredibly important and can make learning Turkish so much easier, because if you look at a sentence and actually figure out where the actual verb is in Turkish, that can mean everything, because the Turkish language is mostly revolving around the verbs. It's not about the subject or the object. But first, just to show the subject, object, verb structure, let's go through a short sentence. For example, I like pizza. I, the subject, like, the verb, pizza is our object. Now in Turkish, we would say I pizza like. That is, we put our verb last. But not exactly. You don't actually say that in Turkish. In Turkish, you would actually say, let's write the actual Turkish term. We would say pizza seviyorum. And as you can see, we only have two words. The second word means I like. The first word, well, I guess you already know what pizza is. And the point here is that the verb is pretty much the entire sentence here. Now, yes, we still do need the pizza here to show what it is that we're talking about. But had it been, for example, I get myself dressed, for example. Okay, let's put that. I'm getting dressed. I am getting dressed. Here, once again, the object of this is once again ourselves. It's a reflective. So here we would say in Turkish, we would say, ben giyiniyorum. Which basically means I am getting dressed. And actually, we don't need the ban. Again. Giyiniyorum. This in Turkish is sufficient enough to say I am getting dressed. This includes our verb. This includes our getting dressed and the fact that we are dressing ourselves up. Let me just check that we are doing okay. Yes. So, once again, we were able to create the entire sentence just based on the verb. Moving on. We have that in the Turkish language, as we just saw in our previous example, language is all about suffixes. Unlike where in English we have just put how many words? Let's see. 1, 2, 3, 4. That's 4 words. Those 4 words, their equivalent in Turkish was exactly 1 word. This word includes all the necessary suffixes, and hence we don't need to add anything else. Additionally, we just add suffixes rather than adding more words. And this may seem hard at first and complicated, but that is actually an amazing thing about Turkish, because this not only applies to, say, sentences, but also words. Like, for example, the word to say die is ölmek, and the word to say to kill is öldürmek. We are just adding dur here. Let me just write that down. Ölmek, öldürmek. Ölmek means to die. Öldürmek means to make someone die. Let's try this differently. Öğrenci. Maybe you've seen this word before. It means student. We also have öğretmen. Maybe you've seen this one. The first one, öğrenci, means student. The second one, öğretmen, means teacher. Now, if you notice, we seem to have some sort of a similarity here, right? This part seems to kind of be the same between both words. Now, this isn't just a random coincidence, but there's actually a reason behind it. Öğretmen, let's take the last part. This man part and G part. These actually both kind of, in a sense, won't get into too much detail, but in a sense, they mean occupation. And then we have öğret and öğren. They're still a bit different. Öğret, once again, the T here means that you're making something happen. And then öğren, here you're the person that's happening. And let's understand what it actually means. Öğren means to learn. Öğret, well, let's look at the T. The T is to make it happen, to make, learn. And hence a student, the word for student in Turkish is simply learner. We have taken the verb to learn and we have added suffixes to show that it is a learner. And the word for teacher is someone that makes someone learn. And that's the point here. That's the magic of Turkish. The fact that it's usually around 3-4 letters, and a lot of the time they're actually verbs more than anything. And basically by putting some suffixes, as long as we learn the correct suffixes, we can actually create our own words. And that's something nice, as in you don't really need to worry about vocab that much. And the reason you need to do that is because suffixes are the essence of the Turkish language. It's all about suffixes. But not any suffix. And that brings us to our 4th point. You see, phonetic harmony is critical. As in, it's important that the sounds, think of it like music. It needs to fit. Every 2 sounds that we put next to one another need to somehow match. Now, how they match? Well, to do that, we need to really understand the alphabet, both actually in Turkish, but also in general. Like, there are some very key points which I will explain now. So let's start with the alphabet. It's very important. So first we have the letter A. And a word will be, let's see, arkadaş. Maybe you've heard of it before. It means friend. I'm going to write that down. Friend. Now, if you didn't quite get the pronunciation, it's fine. We will go over it in different ways until you really understand what these letters are, because there are rules to them. There are specific tricks to them. So this A is kind of like in the first letter of under or umbrella. A. Not exactly A. But think of the depth that's important. It's very important that it's a deep letter. So it's arkadaş. Not arkadaş. Arkadaş. Let's go to the next letter. And let's take the words banka. Let's continue to use the letter A. And it means bank. That's actually quite nice. Here in English, this was pronounced as bank. Here it's banka. Ba. Banka. Bunker. Like almost like bunker. Bunker. Banka. Okay. Let's go to the next letter. And we have the letter J. Now, in the Turkish language, even though the other letter, this letter J, does exist, it's not really used that often. Most of the time, if you want to actually use the letter J in Turkish, you will almost always see this letter, J. J. This letter is incredibly rare, and there's a possibility that you might never actually see this again for years. It's really not that often, unless, well, I'll come to that word in a bit. So letter J, and the word we'll use is John, which means soul. Now, this can be used soul in the romantic sense. Say someone is saying this to their significant other, Canım, my soul. Or it can be also used in an endearing manner from like an elderly person to a young person, Canım. It can be used, can, for souls, like on the news, like let's say 5 people lost their lives. 5 kişi canları kaybetmiş. Or it can actually also be used in a bit of an offensive manner, like a bit of a belittling manner, like canım ne diyorsun? Yeah, it's a bit more. It's kind of like when you like say someone dear. It's sometimes condescending in a sense. Anyways, the next letter we have is the letter Ç. And the word we're gonna have is check. I won't talk about this letter yet. Actually, I'll do it right after. We'll skip the D and we'll come back to the D in a bit. Let's do this letter. E. Let me write the words. Enteresan. 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 On its own, this is kind of like pronouncing the letter E on its own, this letter. Inside the words, we can think of the English words check, ek. So here, let's go over the letters real quick. Enteresan. Enteresan. Now, there's a specific reason actually I chose to write this word specifically, was that this is the same word here. Let's try to pronounce it now. Check. And now, there's another reason why I specifically left the D for after. Let's try to pronounce this word. I'll give you a second. It's dilek. So this here is our letter E, like the long E. So let me write this. In a sense, this is like D and then lek. Dilek. This is kind of how it would, this is kind of the spelling that would create this sound in English. Dilek. And this word means desire. So maybe if you're giving a petition, a dilekçe. But also, I forgot to translate this one. This is interesting. And this here, check, that is the exact same sound that I wrote previously. Check. And it means to pull. Okay. Now, let's try another letter. And once again, let's combine the two vowels that we have covered so far. Vowels are incredibly important in Turkish. We will understand more about them in a bit. Fena. Fena. And it means bad. Let's talk about the pronunciation real quick. It's fe. It's almost like, think of it like or kind of. Fe na. Fena. Means bad. Understanding the correct pronunciation is not just something for getting your point across better, but it will help you understand how to create words. It's important. So do pay very close attention to these letters. Next letter, we have the letter G. And the word is going to be gal. Yes. Gal. It's like gal. And this means come. So, if you are outside and someone's beckoning you to come over, like gal, 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 gal. And then we have the letter Yumuşak. And here, this letter is called the soft G, Yumuşak. But what is it? Well, it's a vowel extender. So what does that mean? That means that whatever vowel comes before it is extended. Now, for that reason, we cannot have this letter at the beginning of a word because, well, there's nothing for it to extend. It must have a letter before it that is especially a vowel that it will then extend. So, let's write a word. Actually, I'll write this word first. Öğrenci. Öğrenci. Now, this word means students. Let me pronounce it one more time. Öğrenci. Now let me remove this. Öğrenci. If we remove this, it's öğrenci. No, not exactly, but close enough. I did slightly, still kind of pronounce the yumuşak G, but it's not there. It's öğrenci. You've kind of have to extend. So let's try another word. Yes, this is great. This is not the perfect one. But let's do it nonetheless. This is arch. Notice how I spent a lot of time on the yumuşak G here. Arch. Let's remove one. The thing is, we can't exactly just remove one because we'd have a double vowels, and we can't have double vowels in Turkish. But without it at all, it should be ach. 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 And then we have arch. There's a part where you have to just let out the air and just really take your time while pronouncing this letter. So now, let's try the letter H. And a word is actually going to be an interesting word. Now, how do you think we pronounce this word? Now, I'll give you a second to think about this one. There's a specific reason I'm giving you that second. You've thought about it? Okay. So, the pronunciation is hala. And that means aunt. But I can also pronounce it as hala. Hala. Now, this may sound very similar, may sound the same, depends on how you feel about it. The meaning is very different. First, there was pretty much historic at this point, but it's still present in terms of pronunciation, but it's no longer as often found in terms of writing. And it's those little hats, the accent circumflex on the A's. These make the A's much thinner. Well, that's how they're called in Turkish, more ince. Basically a bit more high pitched, shorter. Hala. And this means still. So, for example, hala olmadı mı? Like it's still not, it still didn't happen. Hala mı gelmedi? He still didn't come. Now, I do understand that at this point it might be difficult to differentiate between the two, and if necessary, I will go into more detail, maybe on a separate video later on. It's actually not that hard to distinguish if you can just listen to it a few times. Maybe put some examples into Google Translate and try to see how they would pronounce each different words. If not, let me know in the comments and maybe we can work something out. Now, the next letter we have is the letter E. Now, the example I have is going to be ırk. Irk means race, and I'm not talking about the running race, as in, for example, the human race. And the reason I picked this word is because let's bring up English words. So this is irksome. Not identical, but super close to the way this letter is pronounced. Irk. Irksome. Irk. Let's try it in different examples. We also have words like kapı or rakı. It's irksome. And of course, we also have the letter that we already mentioned before, and that's the letter E. And the word I'm going to have for that one is going to be internet. Notice how I pronounced it. It's important. Internet. Internet. I don't think I need to put a translation next to it. Oh, but I do have to put one for this word. So let me write that. This meant tree. Internet. Notice how this is the double E sound. E. Internet. 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 Next. Now we have this letter. Remember when I said about the letter J here? About the fact that in Turkish, we always use this letter. This letter has the exact same sound, the J sound, but it's just not commonly used. Most words here are borrowed from another language. And I will give one word, and that's jant. It's just there aren't really that many useful words with this letter. So I couldn't really find a good word. So what we have is jant. Jant is the rim of a car. So if that somehow relates to your profession, then it is a useful word for you. So let me write that down. Rim. The rim of a car, like this shiny part. And now, this is where it gets interesting. Let's write the words. Kardeş. So this means sibling. Brother, sister, whatever. As we said, we don't have really genders, just the sibling. But, do you remember a word that sounds a lot like this? Let's bring it out. We have arkadaş. And we have kardeş. They do look a lot alike, don't they? But as we said, these kind of things are not a coincidence. This is quite a long word. And we did say that such long words usually don't exist in Turkish. Turkish has very short words. So how can we have such a long word? This is like how many letters? Let's see, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. That's a lot. Well, the reason we have this is because the actual word is much shorter. They both end with dash and desh, right? And as you may have guessed, these are suffixes. We won't go into too much details about them, but let's say this. These dash and desh are more about like having in common. So I'll do the bottom. No, I'll do the top one. Because this is harder. Arkadaş. So arkadaş are friends. And what do they think? What do you think that they have in common? I know this sounds a bit weird, but like they have their backs in common, as they support each other. They've got each other's backs, and that is how, in a sense, this word comes from. So arka means behind. Now, what do you think siblings have in common? I'll give you a second for this one. Probably it's not your first guess. Based on like most students that I've tutored so far, it almost never is their first guess. Have you taken a second guess? Odds are it's not that either. Now, your third guess, there's a high possibility you're quite close. Maybe you are thinking about mother, or maybe you've said father at some point here. Mother would have been closer. And yes, you see, kar comes from the Turkish words karın, which means a stomach. And that is what two siblings have in common. So in a sense, these words are basically saying, arkadaş, oh, you're the other guy that has my back. Oh, we've got each other's backs. And kardeş is just, oh, he's the other guy who came from the same stomach. So now, let's look through the letter L. And the word is going to be liman. And liman means port. So, you may have seen this at an airport. Havalimanı. Or, I would say seaport, but not many people have noticed what's written on a seaport or even gone there. But most people, assuming that you're a foreigner that's coming to Turkey or has come to Turkey at some point, odds are you've come through an airport, so you've seen havalimanı written somewhere. You may have seen another word also, havaalanı. We'll talk about the differences between them more later on, but right now, liman is port. Hava is air, so havalimanı, airport, or deniz limanı, that's seaport. Now, let's go through the next word letter, which is going to be the letter M. And the word is meşgul, which means busy. Now, the words that I've picked out are either words that I think are very useful. I think the word busy is a very useful word. Or words that are great in pointing out specific pronunciation tips. Or that just have amazing things like kardeş and arkadaş. These were picked specifically for that. Next letter we have is the letter N. And I will use the word niye, which means why. And this isn't the only way to say why. There is actually a plethora of different ways to say why. And we'll talk about why there are so many different whys. There's actually a reason for them, and we will talk about questions in a specific lesson for its own. So for now, let's say this is why. But generally, it tends to sometimes be more of a preference thing. You'll find some people use one more than the other. Some people maybe use neden more. Some people maybe use niye more. Some people may use niçin more. There is some personal preference that comes into play as well. Okay, so the next letter we have is the letter O. And the word is onun. Or I could have just stuck with the word o, which means it's the pronoun for anyone, whatever gender, whatever they are, whatever they identify as, doesn't matter, it's o. And instead I've written onun, which means it belongs to that, person, object, whatever. Onun. So this is his, her, okay, it's, and so forth. Next, next we have the letter and let's write our words. Öğrenci. Now, if you know any French, this is so much easier because this is simply like in the word sœur, sister. Öğrenci, sœur. However, if you don't, it's not an issue. This in English doesn't have the exact alternative, but it's closest to the sound of as in someone's asking you something, you don't really know what to say, and you're like, what was it? Close. Not that sound, but close to that sound. So, öğrenci. Or maybe, if this helps you in any way, the verb to to make an error as in, to close. Now, we have the letter P. I don't want to write again what this means. I've mentioned it quite a few times by now about it being a learner, students, and so forth. So I assume at this point that you can gather that, so I won't have to write it again here. Now, for P, the word is going to be para, which means money. And next letter is the letter Q. But there's no Q in Turkish, so we get to skip one. Next letter, we have the letter re, and it means, sorry, it doesn't mean anything. It's used in the words rahat, which means a comfort. The next letter we have is the letter S, or se, and the word is seç. Choose. You can maybe, if you're, say, booking some tickets, and on the seats, you might see the word seç, as to pick out your seat or so forth, or in general, just seç, or to choose. And then you have the letter she, and the letter she basically is used in the word şehir, which means city. Okay. Next, we have the letter T, pretty much the same as Turkish, and the word is tat, and it means taste. It's also a Turkish brand, by the way, but this is not sponsored in any way. A taste, so not the verb to taste, but more like it has a nice taste. Onun tadı güzel. Ignore the fact that I changed the letter. We'll talk about that actually right after we finish the alphabet. After the letter T, we have the letter U, and our word is uyku, which means sleep. Not to sleep, not the verb. Once again, just the noun. And this U is the, basically like this double O here. U. Zu. So, uyku. Another thing to keep in mind is that the Y here is unlike in English, for example. You can say in the word buy, it has a sound of its own. It has this almost like an I sound. Here, no. In Turkish, it has no sound of its own, that is. In a sense, it is similar to the yumuşak G, this one over here. Where was it? This letter here. It has some similarities, as in it just cooperates with the vowels to an extent. It has a Y sound. It cooperates. I mean, it can be found, this Y letter can be found at the beginning of a word. We will actually see it at the beginning of words. For example, yumurta or yemek, but it doesn't have any vowel sounds. So here it's uyku. The point here is to keep your mouth curved throughout the entire word. Uyku, because the only vowel here is the u. That's the only thing that should change. I should not hear you when you say this say something like uyku or something, which is a common mistake. It's just uyku. The only vowel is u. Uyku. Next, we have the letter U, and the word is going to be üst, which means top, as in üst rafta, on the top shelf. And this, in a sense, it's similar to the pronunciation of like ew, that's disgusting, or few. It's similar, just not exactly identical. We'll understand more. These are very important. But yes, basically it's ü. Okay, and next letter, we have the letter V, and we'll use a very simple one, and that's ve. And this basically means and. And then we have the letter W, but we don't have the letter W. There is no W in Turkish. And then we have the letter X, but there is no letter X in Turkish. And then we have the letter Y, and yes, there is a letter Y in Turkish. And the word is going to be yemek, which means food. And then we have the letter Z, and for that, we're going to use the word, let's see, zengin. And this means, oh, did I not forget to write this here? Food and rich. Now, I was actually thinking of talking more about these letters, because I do need to explain why and how they're pronounced as such. But I think that I should definitely make the next video about it instead, because this is taking a lot of time right now, and I do need to go and actually teach in a bit. But for now, I want you to go over what happened. Like, maybe go over some parts of the video where I pronounce these letters and really understand what happened. The words themselves are words that you should definitely remember. They're quite useful words. But as to why and how they're used, the vowels, and also we have other special letters. We also have these letters here. Where were they? These S's and the P's. They actually have some special rules of their own. And this is what creates the harmony. But at least so far in this lesson, we have seen the no genders. We've seen a bit about the suffixes in terms of the words. We've seen how they work in arkadaş and kardeş. And we've seen one example here actually, onun. We've taken him and we've put a suffix to show that it's his or her. But this was more of an introduction rather than anything else. So if you plan to learn Turkish and you're serious about it, I recommend that you go to the next video in this list, and hopefully I'll have a whole playlist on the Turkish language. And if you want to check out tutoring services, you can check out the link description box down below. I've worked there for quite some time. I think it's a great platform. And if you have any questions, just let me know in the comments down below.